1,000 years ago, the podcast was green and good. And then the boys started smoking crystal and crack. And now it's the Dark Podcast. I'm Matisse Van Rossum.
That's
You
really
stole
good.
my bit. Oh, man, I was totally going to do that. Oh,
My
man.
name's the one that starts with an M, you bitch.
Well, I'm Ben Sheets. I don't quite have a good intro anymore.
I've also been robbed of an intro. My name is Cleveland Mosier. How's it going, y'all?
We're back. And you know something, boys? Kids, they're scared of everything. You know why? Because they're fucking babies and their tiny hands can't punch scary things like my strong masculine adult hands can.
Look at those hands. Look at those
Right,
big
they're-
old masculine man hands.
And
you can't see them, but I'm vouching.
If anything scary were to come my way, I would just say, nah, fuck you, and I would punch it with my aforementioned enormous, strong adult hands.
That's why I wear Hulk hands at all times.
Exactly, because the bigger your hands are, the less scary the world is. And kids have, fun fact, kids have, on average, statistically, some of the smallest hands in the world.
That's just science.
Yeah.
So we're talking about children's horror today. And before we get into our main subject, just want to go around and ask you boys what were some of the movies and TV shows, or I guess just media in general, that scared you when you were a child.
Well, there's a couple movies that scared the shit out of me as a kid. Two of the main ones were Monster House, oddly enough.
Oh, nice. I never saw that movie.
I thought the CG in that movie was so uncanny valley and horrifying that just freaked me out. And oddly enough, the other one would be Son of the Mask. Also,
Really?
Also because I found the CG horrifying. And in fairness, that CG is pretty disgusting and horrifying.
It hasn't aged well.
Oh yeah, no, not at all. Both valid answers. For me, I was raised pretty uniquely, and I was grateful for it. My dad liked showing me like old classics growing up, so he started me like silent era and and then going up through the 40s and 50s, and I made my way into modern films off of that. And he figured it was time for me to watch the original King Kong when I was maybe 6 or 7. And it scared the living hell out of me. And I still remember like being just so frightened as a child of the shot like of King Kong's face, like the close up with its mouth moving. The thing filled a studio too. It was really cool. But yeah, that inspired me. I think later on, I like big old spooky faces and stuff. So definitely had a positive impact. And then the other one I'll mention is I was way too young when I watched Princess Mononoke the first time. Very glad for it. It had that film had an incredible impact on me.
I can definitely see some stuff in that movie that would be really scary to a child.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, even like Miyazaki, I think expressed an amount of regret for how violent the film is, which I find to be relatively interesting. Or at the very least, he said it would be the most violent film he ever made. And so far that's been the case. There's some darker subject matter ones, but Mononoke is the most viscerally violent for sure. I mean, he's like firing his arrow and shooting people's arms off and stuff. It's
That's
pretty
true.
rad.
Yeah, it is. It's pretty bloody as well. I forgot about that. It's
Yeah,
been a
it
while
is.
since
It's
I've
quite
seen
gruesome.
Mononoke.
bloody,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's
a
pretty
gruesome
violent.
film.
What were yours?
I had some very strangely specific ones. For instance, I remember being really terrified of the Heffalumps and Woozles song
same!
in the Winnie the Pooh movie.
Oh, they scared the fuck out of me.
I would a lot as a kid when I was like sick and I would have like a high fever or something. I would have like fever dreams that were kind of like that Heffalumps and Woozles sequence where there's just like weird like anthropomorphic colorful monsters like marching through a black void.
Dude.
And
Yes.
that shit I loved that movie. I watched it tons of times.
Oh, yeah,
But
same.
the Heffalumps and Woozles part always freaked me out, which was, thinking back on it, particularly a strange thing to be scared of. Some of the other things, the show Dinosaurs.
Oh, yeah.
The costumes, like the weird human dinosaur hybrid thing.
Doing like regular human things.
Yeah.
It's fucked up, man.
But they had like
fucked up.
They had like those big bug eyes and just like enormous mouths with like human teeth, and that shit freaked me the fuck out as a kid. And I also remember going to the movie theater to see, I think, iRobot, and they played a preview for the first Alien vs. Predator movie, and it gave me nightmares for weeks.
I could see that movie at the time.
It was before, obviously it was before I had seen any of the Alien franchise, so I only knew like what people had told me, and that trailer scared the shit out of me, and that one's really funny to look back on because that movie fucking sucks.
What I will say is that Alien vs. Predator Requiem still gives me nightmares, but not for any of the content in it.
But yeah, kids get scared by really weird things, and it's weird how shit like that goes on to affect you as an adult, even if you're not scared of it anymore. Like, I feel like if I watched Winnie the Pooh now, when that Heffalumps and Woozles shit hit, I feel like I would still have some sort of like visceral panic reaction, like way back in the corner of my lizard brain. Today we're talking about your pick, a film that I watched dozens and dozens and dozens of times as a child. My mom made me an illegal copy of the VHS from Blockbuster, and it is a film that many parts of it did scare the shit out of me as a child, but I became so obsessed with it that I just wanted to watch it over and over. That film is The Dark Crystal. Jim Henson's 1982, some might say magnum opus in terms of his puppetry. I think there are arguments for and against that idea.
It's definitely his most ambitious. I would say up there as one of the most ambitious things he's done.
Yeah, I'd be curious to compare like that with The Labyrinth as
Yeah.
well, for sure. I'm almost certain The Labyrinth had a larger budget.
I think there would be
for a
strong
larger scale.
arguments for both. The Dark Crystal is probably my favorite Jim Henson film, just because I did see it so many times as a child, way more than I ever saw The Labyrinth or any of the Muppets movies or anything like that. The Dark Crystal is probably one of the earliest film memories that I have, just in general.
Yeah.
So, Cleve, since it's your pick,
Certainly.
I'll hand it off to you, and I'll let you talk a little bit about The Dark Crystal and why you chose it.
Yes. So, the primary reason being that Netflix is putting out their Dark Crystal series
Yes.
within the coming months.
They just released a teaser trailer for it
And I'm pretty hyped,
about 2 weeks ago at the time of this recording, I think. A week and a half.
give or take. It looks quite fun. So we'll probably talk about that in a little bit.
Yeah, we can talk about that at the end.
Sure.
Yes. The Dark Crystal is a fairly simplistic narrative. I would say it's more geared around the large set pieces.
I would say it's pretty bread and butter high fantasy narrative.
Oh yeah, about as
There are good guys, there are bad guys, bad apocalypse thing coming. Unlikely hero must fulfill prophecy and defeat bad guys.
Yep. There you go. I mean, and honestly, you just give them names and you have the core plot line. There was some sort of schism in the past. The evil Skeksis have control of the Dark Crystal, and in accordance with the prophecy, there will be an astral alignment that will grant them, through conjunction of the Dark Crystal, eternal life. So they're really pushing for that, and the rest of the realm is not so keen on that. And it was one of the parts of the prophecy is that a Gelfling, which are the sort of the human equivalent in this story, or human elf hybrid creature thing, we'll definitely be unpacking that. They were prophesized to be their downfall, so they basically had a little Gelfling genocide. And there's only one Gelfling presumably left alive.
Which is, right off the bat, extremely dark for
Holy
a children's
fuck,
movie. Basically, like, Gelfling Holocaust.
Also, it seems the Netflix series is a prequel about that, and I'm totally
which makes
on board.
me more keen for it as well.
Yeah, same. It's like let's see it happen. Good lord, let's watch a puppet genocide. Sign me up, please. I'm not pro genocide. I'm not even pro puppet genocide, but let's see it. Let's let it come out. Let's see it. So I think from there, honestly, we can just unpack it like scene for scene.
Okay.
And based around spectacle.
Sure.
Is there anything else?
One thing I want to go into a little bit. It's my only major part of criticism for this movie, because I know you guys have a lot of
I've got several criticisms,
childhood stuff connected to
sure.
this,
Sure.
and
I mean,
after watching it, I realized that I actually haven't seen this movie before. All of my recollections of what I thought this was were connected to Labyrinth and Return to Oz, actually.
Interesting.
Labyrinth, I can see.
Well, Return to Oz is a lot of the same puppetry designers and all that.
No shit.
Yeah, because it's Henson, Frank Oz.
I'm thinking of a different Oz related thing. I'd have to.
You're
There's
probably
so
thinking of
many
The
of
Wiz or
those.
something.
Yeah, some other bullshit.
But I don't have that childhood baggage connected to it. And the biggest thing I had a problem with this movie was, you mentioned it was a very bread and butter story.
Yes.
And that's very true. To me, I kind of found the story really bland.
I mean,
and boring.
I don't think you're wrong. I think this is the perfect time to emphasize that this is a movie for children.
Yes.
And viewing it through the adult lens and taking it in for what it is, with our point of reference for the hundreds, if not thousands, of movies we've all seen in our lifetime. Like, yeah, it's a kid's movie. The story is really easy, so young children can digest it. And it does sort of, like, as an adult watching it with, being sort of naturally tuned for a little bit more complexity and nuance and narrative, it is kind of just like, okay, it's, from a story standpoint, this is not really why I'm here.
And in a way, I almost wish there was some more emotional weight to the story itself, rather than the events of the story are very charged. But the core story with the Gelfling and what
I kind of agree. I didn't find in this watch, my first watch of this film as an adult, I didn't even really particularly feel anything for any of the characters.
Yeah, exactly. And
more of
especially
what
the Gelflings.
More of what I was so fixated on was the technical and visual aspects.
Absolutely.
And
yeah.
from that perspective, I think the film is a complete masterpiece.
Oh, absolutely.
And I think there's enough of that I wasn't bored watching the movie. I think the narrative is a little bit boring because it is so plain and simple, but it's such a continuous feast for the eyes. That's enough to entertain me in this case, I think.
I will make a point of defense for it, though I do agree. It's definitely not a complete argument, but I think it's a point worth bringing up, and that is that especially early on, it's actually probably how I should have led with my description of this film, that there are no human actors in this movie. It is exclusively puppets.
Right.
Considering when did you say it was made?
82.
82, yeah. So coming out of the 70s, to justify an entirely alien, handcrafted environment that is so obscure and so strange, with all these weird little critters and mechanisms that all seem to have their place in that surprisingly complex world building. The world itself, which is included in the sets and the puppetry mastery we're talking about, is fairly nuanced and depthy. It's exclusively the plot line itself that remains flat, and what are I shouldn't say flat, but they're really simplistic. And I think
it's pretty flat.
Yeah,
I don't think that's an incorrect description of the plot.
No, it's true. And I think that plot line could be done in a way that's not flat. I think that it's not necessarily its simplicity that makes it problematic. I think it's more the approach with charging the characters.
Well, yeah, and I think
reliance.
honestly it was just a little shocking to me, because I'm so used to very emotionally driven Jim Henson works.
Oh yeah, he's the king of it in almost all of their
to
content.
see
Sure.
the exact opposite with this kind of took me by surprise. And that was the biggest criticism I had of this movie. I wanted to mention it early because I know we're just gonna be gushing about all the technical elements.
no, I think it's the
because
right call.
Technically,
it's a fair criticism that I largely agree with.
Same.
I think having the added childhood nostalgia makes it more forgivable for me, but coming from somebody who doesn't have that, I think it is 100% a fair criticism, and I think you're mostly right about it.
No, I do too. I think
In a lot of ways, it's also like baby's first high fantasy. You know,
for sure.
It was probably my first exposure to high fantasy. Either that or the cartoon Hobbit and Lord of the Rings movies.
Yeah.
It was either
down to Goblin Town.
It was either this or one of those films. I can't remember which, but you know, it's like it's a child's introduction to high fantasy, and I think in that respect it does a pretty good job. Because the world does feel believable and lived in, even if the narrative events might not be particularly interesting. For a world populated completely by puppets, by lifeless objects, it feels very lived in.
Richly so.
Yeah.
Abundant even. I largely agree. Like the plot points, especially like having just an ambiguous prophecy, you know, hanging over their heads. It's always a huge concern from my perspective. Having like riffed on that a lot in castle battles, you know, and like my own
find the lost crystal, the crystal shard, heal the dark crystal, make everything okay.
Exactly. Tell you what, while we're unpacking our concerns with it, because I think it's not a bad idea. Let's unpack a few more. I've got my own as well, and they are pretty apparent immediately in the film, and that is actually the design of the Gelflings. Even as a child, I actually didn't enjoy them very much, and that is carried on into my adulthood.
They're oddly very dated. They feel very late 70s, early 80s.
They also feel the most like puppets out of everything in the movie. They feel
they get the most face time.
They feel the most lifeless, and for the protagonists of the film, that is a problem.
You know what's fascinating too about them is in the making of documentary about this film, the person who is charged with making the puppets, who I think was someone's anyway, the point is that she submitted dozens of iterations of the Gelflings to Jim Henson and Brian Froud.
This is the one they chose.
I know.
I can't imagine the others.
Like,
oh god.
Dude, no, the other iterations looked more animalistic and like hit a much better spot in the uncanny valley. Like they showed some of the other ones. I was like, why didn't you do that?
You know what I would say?
I wish they'd look like puppies instead of humans.
I would say either that or the opposite, and just have the Gelflings be played by like children.
Right.
And do the labyrinth thing and have the Gelflings be
just bring back Jennifer Connelly
because
get
what
some crystal contact balls
because like one of my biggest things is like the Gelflings look so dead in comparison to everything else that even as a child something in my brain subconsciously noticed when there's the wide shots and it's the Gelflings are like when there's one climbing or something, it's obviously like a child in a costume and they just have the shot at a distance so they can get naturalistic movement. And I don't think that as a child I was able to like make that distinction, like, oh, it's the difference between a puppet and a real actor, but like it always like clicked something that's like there's something off about this to me, and I really noticed it now as an adult watching it, and I could put words to it. You know, when you actually see these things like moving like a person is supposed to, it's jarring.
Yeah, well, they're a pretty fantastic example of uncanny valley. Like I think that they're not human enough, they're not doll enough, and it just hits a weird middle ground. I think if they had bigger eyes, have been a little more puppy dog like or whatever, like it would have been fine.
Yeah,
but that or they just been more human and
go one way or the other.
Yeah, I think I read somewhere that originally they were supposed to be blue.
That would have helped too.
That probably would have helped. Yeah.
I mean, I think the brownish fleshy.
Yeah,
look
I think
to 'em
I think the
didn't
faces
work
I think the
either.
faces still would have bothered me if they were
Oh,
blue.
yeah.
But that might have been enough of a degree of separation farther that it wasn't quite as bad. I think it's really just like perfectly in that valley.
I think
where
it
it's
would have
like,
just acted slightly out of the
yeah,
uncanny valley.
go in a little bit in either direction and it's already gonna help.
Yeah, yeah.
So I agree with you there.
What my issue is when I first watched it, Michael Jackson post-op was like really heavily like influenced in the news and brought up a bunch. And I can't get the comparative between them and like Michael Jackson
Interesting.
post-op
I didn't
out of
have
my
that
head.
at all, but I can totally
Yeah,
see
I
it.
can
It's-
so see that.
Right, and
Oh my
it's
God.
always been a problem for me, and it's my only problem with this otherwise near perfect film. Gelflings are a little problematic.
I also,
But they're
as,
the only creature that I have.
I also, as a
love
child-
all the others.
to a lesser degree, but as a child, I found the podlings pretty creepy too, which is weird because they're supposed to be like the good, fun, like cute characters, but something about them having these like almost featureless like baby faces, but all like they're
Yeah, they're like
all,
peas in a pod.
yeah, but they're all like wrinkled, like
Flesh
old,
peas,
like
you
old
know?
people. Like that they have these like perfectly round faces with no nose or ears or teeth or anything, but they have like skin wrinkles.
You don't
I
like age ambiguous
that,
flesh vegetables, Tease?
I find it a little unsettling.
As much as I'm calling them like flesh vegetables, I think they're really cute actually. Like despite that,
I didn't mind them.
personally.
I think
I like the
they're
podlings.
okay. They're okay. It doesn't help that like a big part of the film is that like the Skeksis enslave the podlings and like drain their life essence, and then they look particularly horrifying.
Yeah.
It's great. It's spooky, but I think that and we see the enslaved podlings pretty early on in the movie before we get to the podling village later. So maybe as a child I couldn't separate the two.
I do love that you see them as slaves before you see them as free, so that you kind of learn that they're not just henchmen. It's a
Right.
Yeah.
a better way to do it for sure. Creatures I do absolutely love are the sages.
Oh, the Mystics.
The Mystics.
The
Thank you.
Mystics.
Yeah.
Hell yeah,
God.
dog.
What an
Yeah.
awesome.
They're like a
creature
hippie
design.
a cappella choir, man.
Oh, that's what I should have done my opener.
Yeah.
Ah, dang it. Yeah, that would have been perfect. Just going, yeah, they're rad as hell, and I want to go live with them.
They're a pretty cool design. I find them a little bit creepy too, or I did as a child, but in a much more benevolent way because they are like genuinely like good, peaceful characters. Like they establish that from early on. But they're also like beasts, but that have very weird, particularly human aspects, like very human hair and very human hands. But like long horse faces, and it's just that there's a lot of that blend between like human and animal in this movie that is, I find, unsettling, but in a way that I like.
Yeah, I'm super keen. Like this film has given me a lot of great ideas for some of like the upcoming like characters we're gonna be designing, and it stares back. Like I want to do some like weird things that shouldn't have people hands and stuff. Like it's gonna be fun. It's gonna be fun.
Yeah, like there's a lot of. I know we talked about the not so great creature designs, but there's some really great creature designs in this as well. Like
I mean,
love
90%
the,
great.
I
Like-
love the
Oh, mostly, yeah.
Skeksis creature design.
They're amazing.
The Skeksis are probably my favorite.
Yeah, I love the Garthams. The
Gartham are dope. The Gartham scared the shit out of me as a kid
they're
too.
so cool.
Like that, the part where towards the end where like Jin falls into the pit and he like hears the like skittering and then he sees all of the eyes in the darkness. I thought that was
good.
so spooky.
Dude, that
as
holds
a
up
kid.
so well too. Like all of their glowing eyes in the darkness.
And like
looks great.
when the Gartham like come to the Podling village and just start like smashing through the walls, like I always found that really horrifying.
Yeah,
and like throwing the Podlings into like bags and stuff.
So, really cool fact about the creature design in this film.
Hit me.
Every one of the Skeksis and like mystics and characters were built from conception to finish by a singular artist. So each individual Skeksis was designed by someone. They had like the core, concepts and stuff worked up, but that singular person built it, did the clothing, did the casting.
But
for
they were
it.
all done by different people.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, the way
Which
you
is
said it
super
made it
rare.
sound like they were all done by the same person.
No. Each singular one
Was done by a
single
different person. Okay.
Yeah, and that's not common at all. Like normally it's like, okay, cool, this is the latex guy. Oops, so sorry. Normally it's like, this is the latex guy, this is the costuming person, and each person gave their creature their costume. I think it really shows in the film too. Like
Yeah.
it gives each one of the Skeksis so much individuality. Like
I agree 100%. I didn't know that.
awesome,
But
right?
like, yeah, you can, because there's 10 Skeksis, or then the Emperor dies and there's 9. But like, you can, when they're all in the room together, which is for most of the time we see them, you can identify each one of them individually easily, which I think is a really excellent aspect. And I think the best way to do that is by having each one designed by a different person, because it guarantees individuality.
Oh yeah, I love it too because like we're when it comes to like our understanding of dinosaurs right now, we've gone from like the old like big lizards to more like feathery creatures, and
They're just birds.
yeah, exactly, and like how the Skeksis.
Perfectly ride that line between bird and lizard.
Right,
Yeah.
they're like these like weird bird dinosaur people, and it's awesome. Like I love. They were
think-
saying in the making of they're going for like a bird dragon like creatures. And
I think
see it.
they-
they look like old wizened.
I think they capture that
Vultures
perfectly.
or-
Vultures is what I always thought as a kid.
Oh, yeah.
And I think that even today, over 35 years since the movies come out, or no, longer than that, like 37, I think that they still have some of the Skeksis are some of the best creature design in film.
Yeah,
Period.
I'm with you 100% on that.
Like they're high up there, and and I think that how much the Skeksis like fascinated and freaked me out simultaneously as a child is part of the reason why I developed such a fascination with like monsters and scary stuff, and like actively sought out things that scared me, even though I would have trouble sleeping and it would give my parents a headache because I wouldn't want to sleep alone, and like was terrified of the dark, and ultimately led me to the point where we are now doing this podcast every week for almost 2 years. I think I can credit The Dark Crystal for a lot of that, I think, because it was really one of my earliest introductions to like scary things in general, monsters. And the Skeksis are horrifying still.
Well, yeah, and the movie does a great job of letting you know what you're in for early on.
Right.
One of the first scenes we get is the Skeksis, disintegrating into dust.
Oh, the
essentially.
Emperor dying
Yeah.
is Oh man, that's one of the scariest creature designs in the movie. I think is the dying Skeksis Emperor. Cause like the Skeksis are already all like wizened and shriveled and horrible and twisted, and then this is like an ill elderly dying one. So it's like they just ramp that up tenfold.
It's awesome. The way he crumbles when he dies like blew my mind. Like not used to blow my mind, like still does.
It's an incredible
really
effect.
taken.
Yeah, it works
Looks
so
awesome.
well. Oh my god.
One character we haven't mentioned yet is Agra, who is awesome. I love her to bits. I think she's great.
Yeah.
The way she squats when she's sitting down, like, is so relatable.
Agra's hilarious, and how she just screams all of her lines.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah, she's great.
Yeah, her facility too is just
So dope with the
jaw-dropping.
The giant
The-
planetarium.
yeah,
type
the
of thing.
big
With the
like
blades on it,
spinning
like-
Yeah.
constellation machine. Yeah, that shit is dope. And like, man, I wonder how much fun but also how difficult that machine was to build, because they built it obviously life size. Because we do, like, it's not a miniature by any means,
That's
because
full set.
we do see the like the Gelfling like climbing on it, and that's one of those shots where it is like a child in a costume. Like, that's a full fucking room-sized machine, and all the arms are moving independently and spinning around each other and not hitting anything. Like,
That's one of the most jaw-dropping aspects of this film, that just about all of the sets that you see in this movie, like the walk-in sets, are not puppet-sized. They're larger than life.
well, a lot of the puppets just straight up had people in them.
Yeah.
Or then being also operated by multiple people on top of that.
Right, like the Gartham for sure have people in them. The Skeksis, you said, have like 2 people in them, right? Or 2 or 3 people operating them?
No, it's one person inside of it, and then they have a
Different people
it's
operating
like 4 or
the
5 people on
arms?
the outside.
That
Yeah,
would
like,
make sense,
There's
yeah.
a lot. Yeah, no, was it the Gartham? Is that what they're called?
The big beetle
the big beetle ones.
soldiers.
Yeah, it's those. They had they actually built like TV monitor units inside of them so that the person operating them could see how they looked while they were doing it. Which again,
Oh, man.
82.
Sick.
Like
Yeah.
82, and they had these like little like TVs inside, so they could see it. Like you see in the making of, you see Jim Henson inside one of them, which of course I think is fucking rad. You know, like it's good to see like footage of someone who's so like lauded and loved and praised, like being on set, like doing the dirty work and being in those things for like
him
hours on end.
and Frank Oz. If you look at which we should mention that the film is co-directed by Henson and Oz together.
Yes.
It's not just Jim Henson's film. It was his studio. But if you like in the credits, like a good number of the characters are operated directly by Jim Henson and or Frank Oz, which
Yeah.
is dope. Everybody knows that about Jim Henson, you know, but it is still, it's heartwarming to see that the people with the vision are
On the ground floor.
on the ground floor and so close to it that they're operating the puppets as well and not just standing behind the camera directing.
Absolutely. Well, and going off of the insane set design and whatnot, we also have some awesome matte paintings in this
Oh
movie.
my god.
They're
Some of my
just
favorite.
incredible, really elaborate stuff, super detailed, and they even do like early compositing with them.
So fun fact, the way that they did that is they painted them on glass. They used glass sections to run those effects. Like, so when you see like the lightning like rippling through and whatnot, like that's how they were able to
That's
have that worked
awesome.
up, is they had them done on glass.
Sick.
And you
Hell
can get
yeah.
that like massive scale, and you have the just incredible like use of like atmospheric perspective.
Yeah,
It's
no,
awesome. It's
those
so good.
those were incredible. I will say there were a couple of early video effects that did not age well.
Yeah.
But they were very few and far between. Like there were a couple blue screen
Yes.
effects in particular that just stood out because everything else was so
Because all of
freaking
the
good.
practical stuff
Yeah.
looks so amazing
Yeah.
and realistic. Yeah, I agree. There are especially like
like falling characters and stuff.
Yeah,
falling
yeah.
They look
characters
a little clipped.
and like at the very end, like after they heal the crystal and the Skeksis and the Mystics fuse and become like the weird god beings, that it's very obviously like a blue screen with like Jen holding Kira and like walking around,
yeah,
and it looks
yeah.
like shit. I agree, that stuff really stands out. But
But
it's
because those god beings are such a cool design.
well, right,
my
which is
God.
why
Yeah.
there's only a
That's
couple
awesome.
there's only a couple of shots of them all in the frame together, because they keep that separate. Yeah, I think it's really just a credit to how strong the practical effects are as well, that like the early digital, or rather video effects, stand out as much as they do, because it it takes you out of the otherwise very lifelike and realistic world that they've presented so far.
That it does.
Yeah, all of the other details of the stuff, you know, between I keep thinking back to that giant, almost like mound Venus flytrap where it eats a character earlier on. Do you remember
Oh
that?
yeah, in the
Where it's like-
swamp where
yeah.
it eats like the little
It's almost like
scampering
it's almost like an
critter.
undersea clam.
Yeah,
Like it's
Yeah.
almost like the vegetative equivalent.
I found that super impressive. There were
Agreed.
so many different tiny things that didn't have a ton of screen time.
Especially in that swamp where we see a lot of the wildlife that's in this environment. And it's stuff that you see for just a split second that were like fully designed and realized puppets that had people operating them. It's like so much work and attention to detail
and then it's gone.
For just such little things that are minor by themselves, but all together they help contribute to why it feels like a believable world. It all just goes to help that world building and takes away from the fact that you're, watching a film. It makes you feel more believable. It gets you more immersed in the world, which I really appreciate for, especially a movie for kids. Like, kids, for the most part, don't have the capacity to appreciate that kind of thing and have such a short attention span, I certainly never appreciated that stuff as a kid. Not to the same degree, maybe subconsciously, unless...
you appreciate it with your wonderment.
Yeah, and I think that's why it works so well, is because it's so convincing that as a kid you can just fall into it without thinking much about the
framing.
Details.
It's the same thing with like why Pixar movies are so great too, even as an adult, is because as an adult you can really appreciate the insane amount of work that goes into those animations. Whereas as a kid, you don't know how hard it is to do those kinds of things. You just appreciate it for what it is. Lazy animation stands out so much more too when it's not done well.
Been on that side of the fence too, with my own work.
Sure.
It's always like, oh man,
I think of stuff like the old Scooby-Doo cartoons and like He-Man and the Masters of the Universe. Like it has its charm, but like it just doesn't have the same kind of bravado.
It's true. I will say that like the original Scooby-Doo series had some cool animations in it. Like I was going back and watching some old sequences recently, and like it has a lot of shoddy moments. It's a TV series, and
right.
Like, but like there are some cool parts. Like there are some neat things that they do. But anyway, enough about that.
I thought the score was really good.
Oh
the music is really solid.
Yeah, I agree. Man, that all came fucking rushing back to me during the movie. As soon as that main theme hits, I'm like it all just comes back. I was really surprised how many of the lines I still remembered directly from how many times I watched it as a kid, but haven't thought of it in years. I'm like, I know the next line. It's so good.
It's true. Yeah. So ooey gooey, like just sitting down in that movie and just getting immersed in that world is just very, very gratifying. Another cool aspect with immersion. So I've mentioned his name once or twice already, but Brian Froud was the artist who did a lot of the conceptual work for this film, and as well as the visual, like built the visual aesthetic. And he's fully responsible for any of the like the sacred geometry patterning and stuff that you see. He's done a number of
dope. And honestly,
it's out of this world.
I'd forgotten how much of that stuff there was in this movie, but like all of that sort of occultish kind of imagery is just so good.
Oh, I mean, when it comes to like
from a world building standpoint,
like, top illustrators, it's like Alan Lee, John Haub, like Brian Froud, like those guys, like all from the same era.
I'll take your word for
knocked
it.
Out of the park.
Yeah, exactly.
Alan Lee did a lot of like the and John Haub both did a lot of the illustrations for the original illustrations for Lord of the Rings and stuff that you saw.
Oh, okay, cool.
Yeah, Brian Froud's work is just stunning. He has a number. If you enjoyed that stuff, I'd recommend looking up some of his other books that he's done as well. He's done a number of illustrative stories about like fairies and fairy folk and fae. They're all masterfully illustrated. He's so good, but I just love it. Like his organic ornamentation with a very strong like sacred geometry influence, and that's well before like sacred geometry like really had like was that established as a design aesthetic. I'd be willing to bet he kind of grandfathered that style in general, and it's so cool. It's so cool, like seeing all those astral bodies and planetary patterns and movements and
from a
fractal designs.
From a design perspective too, like all of the stuff in like the Skeksis castle, like the crystal room where there's just like that big sacred geometry mosaic on the floor where all the Skeksis have their their place to stand when they absorb like the life-giving energy from the dark crystal.
And it's like complete with that like
The
fantasy
beam.
zodiac like
Oh, yeah.
symbols etched into the floor. And
Very cool. And it also like it helps each of the Skeksis sort of feel more individual too. Like they have their own representations in the zodiac and stuff with all of their different costumes. And I like too, I never noticed or paid attention to this as a kid, but all of the Skeksis are only named by their title or position in the castle. Like the general, the chamberlain, the high priest, the scientist. Other than the general and the chamberlain, none of the others are ever addressed by their names or titles, but based on their costumes, you can still pick them out from a lineup.
Yeah,
I did
yeah.
it to see if I could, but like you can tell which one the high priest is, and you can tell which one the scientist is. And I think that shit's dope. And the fucking throne room,
oh, God.
the Skeksis throne is one of the most metal things I've ever
It's
seen
so
in my life.
metal.
It's
Yeah.
so fucking cool.
like just like photo it and like you have your album cover. Like it's
Yeah,
it's
seriously,
so
yeah, like, you
brutal.
absolutely
I
do.
love it. And
all sharp points and metal and
very cool fact about the summoning room chamber. It's it's a fully it's floor to ceiling built. Because we get a lot of cool shots of like it, like with the whole
from
ceiling
and they have
stars
the balconies around
around it, as well.
where
Multi-floored.
the Gartham are like positioned on the balcony, like looking down on that on the room.
Well, cool thing about that, at the end when the castle crumbles, I don't want to be a crumbling castle. When it crumbles, it actually crumbles. They detonated it. They filled it with explosives and blew it up.
I believe it.
Like
It's fucking awesome.
So to get like
Rad.
the falling rocks and stuff and to see the set fall apart, it's because
looks-
they actually like blew their set apart. They did that in one. They had like multiple high-speed cameras set up. It's
Oh yeah,
so
I'm sure.
cool.
You only have one.
Yeah.
Unless you're Andrei Tarkovsky, but that's a story for another day.
I always think of that scene in Tropic Thunder where they're doing the
Oh, and they missed the
super
shot.
elaborate jungle explosion
at the beginning,
scene.
yeah.
Well, you know,
love
at
that
the
movie.
I guess I'll just tell the story now as an anecdote. In the sacrifice, when they burn the house down at the end, when they were filming it, the film got caught in the shutter.
Yeah.
And Sven Nykvist kind of like went to head in hands to Tarkovsky and was like, we missed the shot, like the camera fucked up halfway through. And like after Tarkovsky raged for a while, they just rebuilt the entire house and did it again.
Damn.
And boy, does it pay off, because
Yes.
that is such a spectacular shot there at the end. But I can gush about Tarkovsky for hours in many, many regards.
Another neat aspect is the design department was so or Jim Henson was so captivated by Froud's illustrations that the cinematographer, I cannot remember his name, unfortunately. He's a British cinematographer. He's the guy who did the majority of the camera work for the film. Brought in they designed this contraption to place on the front of the camera, and it has a cool name. I don't remember what it is, but that actually like kind of presents like a sort of a filtered gel effect over the film that makes the backdrops and sets. It sort of reduces contrast a little bit and makes things feel more like watercolor. So they built this kind of like cool contraption on the front of the camera to make those scenes look more like they're illustrated as well, which I think
Cool.
is super neat. Yeah, there are just so many cool stories, behind just the making of this movie, and it really just has me so hyped for the Netflix version, like front to back.
I have like one or two other quick things I
Okay.
want to touch on.
Oh yeah, there's still plenty.
One of my favorite characters in the film, which I think is worth mentioning, is Fizzgig.
Oh, how do we forget Fizzgig until now? We should have started with Fizzgig.
I love Fizzgig.
He's great.
He's like Kira's. He's not a dog, but he's not a cat either. He's just a weird little beast.
He's a mouth.
He is basically a fluff ball with an enormous mouth full of 2 rows of teeth.
Yeah.
And he's fucking adorable, and also kind of scary. He scared me a little bit as a kid, but I also loved him because he's just so charming and adorable. And my favorite part of the movie is when they decide they're going to go to the castle and they get on those big Land Strider monsters, which are fucking rad in their own design.
Land Striders either, yeah.
And Kira's just like, all right, Fizzgig, you stay here. And he just screams until she lets him come along. I love that part. That is my favorite part of the movie. It always tugs on my heartstrings a little bit when he gets thrown down the shaft. Thankfully, he latches on to something.
Dude,
and
I was
doesn't
legitimately in a
die,
panic during that. I was like, oh my god, I do not remember if this like wonderful creature lives or dies here.
Yeah,
And
which
I'm like,
thank
these
God,
fuckers had
thank
better not
God,
kill
Fizzgig survives.
Yeah, no, Fizzgig underrated. What a wonderful design.
Yeah, I wanted to mention Fizzgig because he's
Pour
awesome.
one out for Fizzgig.
And also, great name, Fizzgig. Come on.
Yeah.
Instant classic.
And the other thing I want to touch on a little bit, because we are a horror podcast, is I think it definitely bears mentioning some of the thematically darker stuff in this movie
Still dark.
that I didn't realize how dark it was until I watched it this time. For like a children's movie, like as a kid, you just don't think of those kinds of things.
Dude, I was so
But,
ready
like-
to go into this film like, okay, yeah, this is really scary when I was a kid, but like, how is it as an adult? And
I
I was
think
totally expecting to be like, oh, not nowhere near. And I was like, no, actually, there are a lot of
Worse,
concepts in this film
in a
that
lot
are
of
way
ways.
darker.
Yeah, like
yeah.
things that I think definitely make this film, if not just straight up children's horror, very much horror adjacent, and why I think we're talking about it on the show. Just like what the Skeksis fucking do to like the podlings and the gelflings is
it's like
is straight up like mad scientist horror shit.
puppet Ludovico technique.
Right.
You know?
Like they
Steal their souls.
strap them into a chair and force them to stare into the dark crystal until it literally causes their life essence to leak out of their bodies in like a liquid form, and then the Skeksis drink it to try to regain their youth.
Blood would have been less scary.
Yeah, like it's and it leaves the podlings all like gray and wizened and just like with milky dead eyes.
Yeah, and they become lifeless slaves. They zombify them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like I didn't think of that as at all as a kid, except that it scared me a little bit. But like as an adult, I'm like, Jesus fucking Christ. And as we mentioned earlier, the fact that the Skeksis straight up committed Gelfling genocide because of their fear of the prophecy, that they just outright murdered the entire species except for Jen and Kira. This is a kid's movie.
Damn, dude. Like, damn.
I guess it wouldn't be a kid's movie without genocide, right?
Note to self. If you're gonna have a kids movie. Yeah.
And the Gartham are very scary design, I think, too.
Oh god, yeah. I mean, their claws have claws on them.
Yeah,
crazy.
just big beetle monsters with their legs look like tentacles. Like they look like beetle jellyfish.
They fuck up the Land Striders too.
Oh yeah, they
Jesus
do.
Christ.
Yeah.
Like that shit is also something we didn't talk about, but just how kind of terrible Jen and Kira are, and Jen just completely inept.
Oh,
but,
yeah,
like,
God.
for being the protagonist.
God,
but
all
like,
of us were like mocking Jen. Like,
they like
loudly.
they like befriend these friendly beasts to carry them to the castle, and then just with no hesitation just use them as a distraction to free the podlings and get into the castle while the Gartham just murder them.
like one of the Gartham like takes the Land Strider like off the side of the cliff, and you just see them fall to their deaths.
Yeah.
And it's
And you
brutal.
hear it screaming too.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
it's a kid's movie.
Come on, man. Like, I'm scared by that. Like, don't kill the Land Striders. These like wonderful hippie beasts.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, we've talked to death about just like what the Skeksis look like, but they're truly monstrous. Like they are the stuff of nightmares. And the dinner scene where they're all like eating and it's really gross and they're all
that's a positive use of the uncanny valley if there
Yes.
ever was. Like they're acting like people and it's spooky and it absolutely is intentional. Like seeing these fucked up bird dragon humans like eating food like with their hands and stuff.
a lot of them have like toothpicks attached to their fingers and stuff, like little like fork extensions and stuff like that.
The food they're eating is live often.
Yeah, it's live, and like there's the fat one that's just like shoveling seaweed into his mouth, and it's really nasty. Like it's gross, man. And I think just like all of that stuff together makes for an extremely dark film for a kids movie. And I know there's definitely some of that in Labyrinth, but I think The Dark Crystal is a darker film than Labyrinth in a lot of ways.
It's been so long since I've seen Labyrinth that I can't really say.
It hasn't for me. I've seen it fairly recently, and that movie is more my equivalent of The Dark Crystal for you, Tease. I watched that movie.
Yeah, I've seen The
that film
Labyrinth
too many
far
times.
fewer times than The Dark Crystal.
Yeah, it's the opposite for me, and I think Dark Crystal is like more ambiently terrifying. Like there's some stuff with like the oubliette, like the hands on the walls, and like there's some pretty spooky fucking moments in the Labyrinth. But this movie is like more directly visceral, like with the lifeblood, the life essence draining, and like killing the Landstriders by throwing them off the side, and the machinations of the Skeksis, like all that shit, like is I think a little bit more like directly spooky. Whereas there's definitely there are some phenomenal sequences in Labyrinth, and
Did
if I had to choose, I'd probably pick Labyrinth as favorite film. But
Did Labyrinth come out before or after The
well
Dark
after.
Crystal?
Well after.
Crystal. Okay, I wasn't sure what year that was.
we'd have to look it up. But
Yeah, I
like,
think it was a couple years after.
because they spent I think 5 years on Dark Crystal.
Jesus Christ, I believe that though.
Yeah, 86. So
Okay, so 4 years after
Yeah.
Dark Crystal.
and then also let's look at Labyrinth budget. It says was 25 mil.
That
budget?
doesn't sound right for 86.
That's impressive.
Yeah.
Jesus Christ, for 1986? That would be like the budget equivalent of like an Avengers movie now.
Yeah, and then Dark Crystal was 15. So
Is that adjusted for inflation?
I don't know, man. I'm just on Google. It just straight up says
Jesus.
25 mil. The box office
Fucked up
US
is
was
true,
just
man.
12.9 mil too. So it's like Jesus.
That's a ton of money.
That's some real cash. That's some
I had
real
no
skrill.
idea. Like I knew they were expensive films, but I never would have guessed that high.
Fuck me. Krull had a $50 million budget.
What?
Fuck off.
A
That
25
can't be
million
right.
budget in 1986 would have been 58 million today.
Yeah.
Okay, so a little bit less than I was thinking, but still. That's a pretty expensive film.
For a puppet.
For a puppet movie.
you
Yeah,
know?
exactly. God, I can't believe Krull was $50 million.
That might actually be the next movie on my list because I've never seen it.
Oh,
And-
What a
God.
bomb.
Okay, well, I mean, that's pretty much everything I wanted to touch on. You know, it's mostly just gushing about how amazing the design and technical work of the film is. I guess I'll start with the rating and we can work our way down.
Sure.
I agree with you with the points you brought up at the beginning about the very simplistic, kind of flat, boring narrative. I think that the protagonists are the least interesting characters of the film.
so worthless.
He's completely useless.
Oh.
He does literally nothing the entire movie. Kira does way more, and he still has to quote unquote save her at the end.
I know. So
which
just let
is-
her be the hero.
Right, which is we don't need to get into that. I think that
No.
speaks for itself.
Yeah, that's enough.
But
wanna get into it.
I think that beyond those criticisms, on every other level, this film is a technical masterpiece, and I would also say a masterpiece of world building, which is surprising considering how kind of generic and uninteresting the actual narrative is, the fact that the world building is so spectacular, usually you wouldn't expect that. But yeah, I still, nostalgia or not, I still think this is an incredible film all around. I will dock it a little bit for that simplistic sort of lackluster narrative, but it's going to be a very strong 4 out of 5 for me.
I'm gonna go ahead and say I don't necessarily know if it's the right answer, but it's my answer, and it's gonna be a 4.5. I know that the main characters of the film are kind of uncanny valley, or quite uncanny valley, and Jen is worthless, but everything else about the film just carries it so far for me. It really is a masterwork, and such a just a phenomenal spectacle. I deeply adore this film, and yeah, I'm gonna go 4.5, but I can dig a 4. 4 makes sense, but no, I'm going 4.5.
I think that's still fair.
Mm-hmm.
This is a really hard movie to rate. I didn't have the baggage of growing up with it.
Without the rose tinted glasses.
Yeah. In terms of technical craftsmanship, it nears a 5. Problem is,
I agree.
Like the comparison we made with the visual effects to the rest of the effects, you can kind of make a comparison between the craftsmanship of all of the art with the craftsmanship of the story.
Sure.
And because that's so flat and so underdeveloped, it stands out so much more because the art is so good. And it's a real bummer, man, because I love the art, and the story and all of the emotional weight just felt so flat that I couldn't get immersed and invested in it in the same way I feel like it deserved. I feel like if I saw it as a kid, I would have appreciated it more, probably. This whole podcast, I've been bouncing between 3 and 3.5. I'm gonna say it's gonna be a 3 with a big asterisk next to it, saying that the art is
a 5.
A 5. Yeah.
The art is a 5.
Yeah, no,
That's
I think that's a completely fair perspective.
Yeah.
And like nostalgia goggles are for sure a thing, and I will always be the first person on this podcast to acknowledge that and use that as a disclaimer for anything that I saw and loved as a kid. Like that's it's inescapable.
And for me too, it's like the design bias also is like so strong. Like having to do like that kind of art every day, like the amount of respect for that kind of craftsmanship. Like I've got rose tinted glasses, like steampunk goggles with all the lenses on them. So like,
but like as a writer and as somebody who is actively writing for a high fantasy world, like I will be the first to admit that this one, not so good. Not so good in terms of writing, and a lot of the dialogue's pretty corny too. But it's a kid's movie, so I can put a lot of that aside.
Yeah.
But that'll give The Dark Crystal a pretty strong 3.8 out of 5 pods average between the three of us. About where I expected it to be, I think.
Yeah, I think it deserves that.
And I'm okay with that overall. Definitely would still recommend. And if I ever have kids, I will definitely be showing them this film, and at that point they'll probably be like, "Dad, what's this old shit? Like, why are you showing me this?"
Just do what my dad did and just like cut me off from the rest of it at that early age. Give him the old shit then, and then gear him up for the new shit. Like it's fine. Like it'll be all right. Then they'll have that respect for like the old stuff. Like that's fine.
I do think we've said a few things about it already, but I think we should mention briefly the Netflix series that comes out later this year. The teaser looks pretty rad.
Rad. Biggest plus for it from me is that the Gelflings actually look all right. Like,
they look a little better for sure.
Yeah.
There's obviously, they're showcasing a few special effects that they could not have gotten away with in 82 that I'm pretty fucking stoked about.
Yeah, I'm very okay with that.
I think particularly of that one shot where there's like some big rolling vehicle, but it looks like it has the same kind of armor as the Gartham. It looked like a Gartham tank,
which
bring
it to me.
If true, big mood. I'm pretty stoked about that. And the impression that I got from the trailer as well is that it seems to be for people our age and older who grew up.
If they're doing a prequel that's about the Gelfling genocide,
it seems
then...
to be a lot more action heavy and less childlike.
Right. Let me talk about that real quick, because I did have some thoughts about it, especially after watching it, because we were talking about in the car like on the way to watch this, and like, yeah, there are a couple of sequences in the trailer for this upcoming one where you see like someone like leaping across something, and like there's like some heavy combat, like it looked like choreography going on. And watching the Dark Crystal, I can see the attempts at that, like some of the scenes with the Skeksis, or the Gartham fighting, and like Jen like leaping across stuff. I think that they're going to do things in this that Jemison would have done.
The test of strength between the general and the Chamberlain to become the new emperor.
Yeah,
with the swords.
Here's one question about it that I have for you guys, because I've been trying to figure out what I think about this. Is, you know, we live in a different era than the time when that movie came out.
For sure, yeah.
A lot of things that they were trying to portray are hard to portray with puppets and whatnot. And so there's a sense of wonder to see some of that pulled off.
Here's what I'll say. The storyline is more relevant to like the current zeitgeist than it's ever been.
It's
a dying world.
Yeah, I'm less talking about the zeitgeist and the story elements. I'm talking about like in 2019.
Will the spectacle still be there because we're more
when we know they can do
accustomed
essentially
to
anything with that stuff with much less limitations? Will there be that same sense of wonder?
I think
oh shit, how did they pull this off?
I think it's going to depend very heavily on the ratio of practical and legitimate puppetry to CG, because it does seem like there is some CG, which is natural, but I think that in 2019, when in at least particularly large budget films, practical effects are kind of on the decline because it's easier to do it
CG
digitally. I think that it'll be impressive from a technical standpoint because of doing these difficult things practically.
Yeah, like many of the things that made Dark Crystal difficult to shoot are still difficult to shoot. And that is what has me excited about it, is seeing like the behind the scenes stuff that they've been putting out, like with them like building the puppets, building these same, you know, these creatures in these large sets. Those are all still human feats.
That being said,
that will always be.
That being said, I do think this show is going to be aimed at a very niche audience, and it's people who grew up with the original.
Yes, and I think that'll help.
And I think that for people who have no exposure to the Dark Crystal, or who are maybe a little bit younger than us, who didn't like grow up watching it, because I think we're probably like right on the cusp of growing up with Dark Crystal, because the movie was already 10 years old when we were kids, you know, when we were born. I think that for people who don't have any exposure, this show is going to hold very little interest, but we'll see.
Yeah, because like
I think it's enough of a cult classic, and that it has enough people like us and older who grew up with it, who love it and who have an appreciation for it, that I think amongst fans of the film, I feel like it's going to be very popular.
Yeah, and I think of stuff like the map paintings, where like it could easily be done digitally now, and people wouldn't bat an eye or think twice about it.
I hope they still use map paintings.
I think map paintings are always still more
enhancing
effective.
You know, the puppetry with CGI that you don't even notice, you know?
Right.
And it's like, yes, that's going to help overall, and it's going to make it even more immersive. But
I hope they keep the CG
I hope
to
we
a
don't
minimum.
lose anything from that.
Yeah.
You know?
Based on the trailer, and you know, it's a teaser trailer, so it was a lot of quick cutting, but based on the trailer, I don't think that's going to be the case.
Yeah. Same.
It seems like it's still going to be vast majority puppetry with touches of CG here and there to accentuate and to add flourish, which I'm okay with.
Oh, quite. Yeah. I think at the end of the day, what this series it looks like they're trying to go with is that analog, that sense of tangibility is still the most, one of the most effective ways to reach out and, to pardon the overused metaphor, reach out and touch your audience, to actually give someone a grip, on a film, to let them see these things, to put actual tangible objects, in your shots. And it makes all the difference in the world.
It seems to like the people who are working on the show are very committed to staying true to Jim Henson's vision.
Yeah.
And he's been dead for a long time. It's obviously still made by his studio, but it also seems like the people who are making it are...
Is Brian Henson working on it at all?
I was about to say, if anyone has, a legacy that's been well-maintained, it's Jim Henson's, on with Brian Henson.
Yeah, do you know if he's working on this at all?
I have no clue.
I wouldn't be surprised.
I would hope so.
I would hope so, too.
It seems to be the biggest thing that the Henson studio has been working on for the last few years. So I would expect that he is involved in some capacity.
I would hope Frank Oz is consulting on it as well.
Yeah, I hope so too.
So I found an article quoting him saying, it's been shooting since last November. It's so cool that Netflix could get behind it in such a big way that we can do it all caps right. And that's coming from Brian Henson. So
cool.
I still don't know specifically what his involvement is with it directly, but that's...
Yeah, I'm looking at the credits on IMDb, and I'm not seeing him in anything.
Oh, shit, too. Yeah, the 10-episode series will feature puppet creatures created by Brian Froud, who was the original conceptual designer of the original film.
Cool. Hell yeah. Well, time will tell. It's coming out pretty soon. Airs August 30th, so in just a couple of months. I'm pretty excited, actually. Yeah. Before I was curious, but now I'm excited. I want only good things for this show, and I want it to be successful. Netflix has a very hit or miss record, but I feel like I can trust the Henson studio.
Yeah, I mean, this quote from Brian Henson just goes on in that respect. I thought by the 80s, the idea of being able to walk into a stage and seeing an incredible fantasy world realized was just long gone because of CG and everything like that. But they've really, again, all caps, done it right. It is all caps great. The workmanship is just stunning. The artistic quality is right there again. What I thought was maybe lost, it's still there. They'll be shooting for another few weeks, and there will be a huge amount of post-production. So, yeah, it's looking promising.
Hell yeah.
Again, coming from Brian Henson, who I feel carried on his father's work so incredibly well. I mean, still, I think my favorite of, the Muppet-related films, or just any, Jim Henson's puppetry-related films, is probably Muppet Treasure Island. Honestly, I might even put it over Labyrinth.
Yeah, I love Muppet Treasure Island.
Treasure Island still might be one of...
Honestly, I really like Muppets in Space. That's kind of a wild card
it's
take.
It's a hot take,
but
it's what I'm with you on.
I don't think it's the same level of quality
Nowhere
as
near.
Treasure Island.
No,
but
no, I don't hate it.
It's quality.
I don't hate Muppets in Space either. Yeah. But I think Treasure Island is just such an incredible masterpiece. I'll definitely be watching that one again soon. And I did too. One of the beautiful things about any of the Henson puppet films is that they're one of the few examples of movies that you can go back to having only previously watched as a child and still be impressed and still be given that childlike sense of wonder. So many movies cannot hold up to your own child imagination, but these are the exception to that. You can still come back to them and be moved by them.
Oh yeah, because even then it's the wonderment of how did they do that?
Yeah,
yeah, totally. No, I still appreciate The Dark Crystal a lot for very different reasons than when I was a child, but my respect for the film is not diminished at all. Maybe a little bit for the writing, but well, with that, before we wrap up, I think it's time for a word from our sponsors.
Yep, it sure is. Right. So today's episode, I got the copy here in front of me, was brought to you your body. You tired of doing things yourself? Tired of having to fulfill the prophecy all on your own?
Sure am.
Yeah, well, it's cool. We got hands. We'll put them in there and we'll do it for you.
Hands in my body?
Yours.
It's more likely than you think.
It is. And for $8.99 a month, it can be brought to you for $12.99 a month. Hands in your body.
We'll shove it up your ass.
But not in a sex way. That's not what it's about. That's not what it's about at all. It's about the art. It's about the art of it. Hands in your body.
Well, thanks again to Hands in Your Body, our fabulous sponsor for this week. Next week, I think, for real, Rock and Roll Nightmare this time?
Yes, the legend of the Rock and Roll Nightmare is indeed real.
Nope. Nope, sorry. We lied to you again. We had another conflict with our special guest, so nope. We're not doing Rock and Roll Nightmare next week. It's Ben's pick instead. So we're gonna do Pontypool. So yeah, Pontypool. Rock and Roll Nightmare, maybe sometime. We'll see, I guess. I said last time it was for real, and this time I'll say that much more hesitantly. But
It's a rock and roll night may or may not.
there you go. So hopefully, yes, Rock and Roll Nightmare with a special guest next week. Definitely not. Rock and Roll Nightmare, definitely not. Pontypool.
Rock and roll night maybe.
If not, you'll be just as surprised as we are.
Yeah.
What's it gonna be?
Pontypool.
Who knows?
If you like the show, if you like being surprised, please take a few seconds out of your day to leave us a nice rating and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever else you get your podcasts. We're trying to work our way up in the numbers. We have noticed a bit of an uptake in our listenership over the last couple of months, which is a pleasant surprise to all of us.
Yeah, thank you.
So thank you. We
you.
want to extend a heartfelt thank you to all of the people who do listen to our show. And we appreciate you, and if you appreciate us, the ratings and reviews is a nice way to say that, and we love you. You can also follow us on Twitter at PodPeoplePod or on Letterboxd at letterboxd.com/PodPeoplePod for a list of all of the films we've talked about on the show with our average ratings and the links to those reviews. You can follow me on Twitter at Mr. Van Awesome.
I'm at Mr. Sheets.
I tweet for at Light Arc Studio for It Stares Back and a couple
Which
of other things.
will be on Steam by the time this is
Yeah.
released.
Fingers crossed.
I think so.
Yeah, fun anecdote on that. We have had to resubmit once or twice because they wanted a little bit more out of our game description. But anyway, just interesting students doing quality control. I was impressed by it. But anyway, yeah. So hopefully, yeah, we should be up.
Go on Steam if you have Steam and look for It Stares Back. And if you don't see it, then it will be up soon. And we'll have a more definitive answer on that next time. If it's there, check it out. We think you'll like it. We hope.
Oh yeah, for sure. For sure. You can also find my work on ArtStation as well, Cleveland Mosier. Yeah, hit me up on the Light Art Twitter. Tell me what you're thinking. How's your day? What's been going on?
What'd you have for lunch?
Yeah, and who'd you tell me your secrets? All of them.
We won't hold them against you, literally or figuratively.
Yeah, for real though. Don't tell me your secrets. I don't need that. I don't need that responsibility.
Tell me your secrets.
There you go. Tease will take them.
I'll take all of your secrets. I'll hoard them away like a dragon of secrets. And until next time, I gotta go. I'm gonna go make the crystal hole, if you know what I mean.